Health is the goal, wellness is the way to achieve it. Today we're going to be talking about health and wellness, both individually and in the workplace.
Welcome to ProfileTree TV, and today we're joined by Vivian McKinnon, who is a health and wellness expert. I'm going to let Vivian explain more of what she does.
Thank you. My name is Vivian McKinnon. I've been in Northern Ireland since 2010, and in 2015 I opened Ireland's first and only dedicated flotation centre, offering restricted environmental stimulation therapy. I'm also the founder and owner of a company called Wellness Consultant NI, where I look at the impact that modern life is having on us all just as humans.
So tell us about flotation.
Sure. I'll start off by taking you back. In 1999 I was taken to a hospital. They thought I had meningitis, so I was taken to the intensive care unit of the contagious diseases in the Western General in Edinburgh. And for 2 days I was completely out. And when I came back to, they had done lumbar puncture tests, they had done lots of different things to try and find out what was happening. And basically what was happening was my lifestyle. I had been, as a child I grew up with a parent who was struggling with trauma and addiction. And so even from birth, at 10 months old I fell face first down 30 concrete stairs in a baby walker. Wow. So trauma was kind of something that I'd lived with for a long time. And as I became older, I had learned the programming from people around about me, and I was using unhelpful coping strategies. So but by the time that had happened in 1999, I was using cocaine, I was using alcohol, I was using cannabis, I was gambling, I was anything to avoid the pain of the past. So when I came back to in the hospital, I had two choices. One was to keep going the way I was going and probably end up in a box, or the other one was to change my life. At that point I never knew what that meant and how I was going to do it, but I knew that it was something that I had to kind of commit to. So I started doing it. But anybody who's been through any kind of change, or anyone who's tried to give up even like negative thinking, and because the biggest thing that I lived with was this inner critic, was this inner voice that kept saying, why are you doing that? You're so stupid, and it was incessant. So about 5 years after that, 2004, after being on the wagon, off the wagon, on the wagon, off the wagon, I went for a float for the first time. And the first time I went in, it was one of these, one of the pod types, and it's almost like a coffin-like sort of structure. And you climb in and you close the lid on top of yourself. So I'm standing there thinking, right, hang on a minute, 5 years ago, I made a decision to myself that, that I didn't want to die. And now a good friend of mine is suggesting that I get in a coffin-like structure, close the lid on top of myself. I was like, so however I did, and I went in, and within no time, the negative inner critic was silenced. I carried quite a lot of pain in my body, so I probably, it would be like sort of fibromyalgia type symptoms. I had pain across my shoulders, down my arms. There were some days like my hair hurt, my nails hurt, my earlobes were aching, like every single part of my body. In the float that day, it was like I had no body. It was like I had no awareness of anything around me. I had quietness within my head, and I even lay there thinking, oh my goodness, I'm thinking about nothing. There's just nothing to think about. And for me, it was the first time I'd had that freedom. It was the first time I'd had that break, that distance, to be able to connect back into who I was as a person. And it took me back to when I was, because you see, growing up, it was, as I've said, it was quite a difficult time. There was so much going on. But I remember the times when I was a kid, sitting up beside my mum and dad, or sitting up beside my mum or my dad separately, and just that feeling of being held and cuddled in, and and it was the rare moments that gave me that connection. So and that's how it felt in the float. So when I got out, I remember standing looking at the water and thinking, my God, this is just water. Like, what's happened here? So I got dressed and got dried and went outside, and I spoke to the lady who owned the float centre, and I was saying, oh my goodness, that was absolutely amazing. Like, what happened? And she said, yeah, it's lovely. It's one of the most relaxing spa treatments you can get. And I said, that's not a spa treatment. that's a mental health intervention you have there. You should be like, and I instantly had all these ideas in my head of how it could be promoted, how it could be. I was thinking, you know, you could have people coming in from the NHS, you could have a centre, and you could have a creche in the centre, and it just became this really creative. Because what happens in flotation is you spend 80% of your energy fighting the effects of gravity. In flotation, that 80% of energy is removed. So that goes inwards, which activates the blood flow and stimulates the lymphatic and the digestive system. As well as that, we're constantly being met by anything between 2 million and billions of pieces of information coming in through our 5 senses. In the float environment, that's completely restricted. That's why it's now called restricted environmental stimulation therapy. So came out that day, chatted to that woman, and then I was just on this mission. So I was then like, right, I'm going to change the world, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And then I was kind of like, then the inner critic kicked in a couple of days, was like, how are you going to do that? Yeah. You're not educated, you left school when you were 15, you like all these different things. So I went to college, studied health and social care, and looked at the underpinning values, methods, theology, like all the theories behind the health and social care system within the UK. Went to university, studied psychology, sociology, was really interested in group dynamics and how we can become a very different person depending on who we're presenting ourselves in front of. And I think there's a lot of us disconnect from ourselves in so many areas at so many times in their lives that we can just start to become a bit lost. And I suppose ultimately the equipment we're using in modern times, our bodies and our minds, we took hundreds of thousands of years to evolve to where we did. And then since the invention of steam in 1758, 59, we've spent the last 250 years like that. Life has changed so much. And it's not like we've been plugged in every couple of years and, you know, had our software updated and, you know, so we really, I think there's a huge, a lot of us struggle internally and struggle to kind of connect to, you know, modern life as it is. So that was, I then studied cognitive behavioural therapy, I studied counselling, I studied clinical hypnotherapy, studied neurolinguistic programming and loved it. Done a master practitioner in neurolinguistics, master practitioner in timeline therapy, master practitioner in hypnosis. Studied with Paul McKenna and Richard Bandler, who invented neurolinguistics. Wow. I'm one of only 7 havening practitioners in Northern Ireland, and I'm the only spectrum performance and emotional coach. I also do laughter yoga and auricular acupuncture. So lots of different things, because I firmly believe when you're working with individual people, you're working with individual people. If you have one method or one theory or one way that you think that works, you're going to have people that either is too big for or is, you know, or they're bigger than that. So so that was what kind of inspired me to open Hydries, and I had done a lot of work in the charity and voluntary sector over here. And I had worked with people who were struggling with trauma and addiction. And I was funded by the Victims and Survivors Service. So it was working very much with people whose lives had been impacted by trauma and who were using substances to cope. And I think because it was so far, I mean, this was 2014. So it had been a good been a good 10 years since I had started to turn my life around, and so I'm very much about intent and purpose. And as much as I would always wanted to work with trauma and addiction, there was a huge question in my mind: am I doing this to help me heal, or am I doing this because I believe I have something to give back? And I think up until, you know, I took on that role, it was very much, this is not for you just now, this is not for you just now. But then through my own healing and through all the things that I'd kind of been through and realised myself, I was then, you know, sitting with these people and thinking, if we had a float tank to put you in, if only we had a float tank. And then that was it. And then, you know, it's just the rest is history, as they say.
Yeah, very good. You got the float tank.
I got the float tank.
Brilliant,
that's it.
amazing. So a float tank is an incredible history, and thank you for sharing so much with us. It really adds perspective to where you are today, so very interesting. So a float tank basically is a pod that you get into and you relax in for a period of time.
So the tank that I got in, the float tank that I got in, as I say, you climb in, you close the lid on top of yourself. When I looked at bringing this to Northern Ireland, so basically my husband was saying, you know, you should open a float centre. Yeah. And I was like, oh, I don't know if I want to work for myself, and I'm not sure if I'm ready for that. So he contacted the local council and he filled in lots of applications for me. I then got a thing from the council saying that that they would give me free business advice. So as we were doing the research on the business, and the more I was kind of being involved with the industry from America, and the more research I was doing here in Northern Ireland. So I also work for the trust. I deliver mental health first aid with the trust. So I was looking at a lot of a lot of the research and a lot of the statistics that are relevant to here in Northern Ireland. And in 2011, there was a research project that was done at Queen's University, which highlighted that just over 39% of the people who live here live with the symptoms of trauma. And I was thinking to myself, and we have, they reckon 1 in 5 people live with some kind of mental health difficulty, problem, illness. That's 1 in 4 when it comes to Northern Ireland. So either they're not counting trauma as a mental health, so I think statistics, you can make them seem what they like. But what was glaringly obvious to me was if what I believe to be true is this intervention is so beneficial for people with trauma, it's going to be really difficult to get people who are living with the symptoms of trauma, maybe panic attacks, maybe heightened anxiety, to say, listen, I have this great thing for you. Come into this coffin-like structure. Like, people are going to tell me to chase myself. So I then was talking to the Laureate Institute of Brain Research in Oklahoma, and they were doing research around veterans coming back from Afghanistan. And there was a rising surge of research around the benefits of using flotation, and they were using these open pods at LIBOR. So I was chatting with the lead researcher there, Justin Feinstein, who's since become a friend. We got chatting, and he was saying, the cabins that the company we use is a company called Floataway, and they are based in Norfolk. And I'm like, Norfolk, like England? And he was like, yeah, he was like, you should chat with them. So we chatted with them. So we now have, so my idea of having a float tank and me doing a room for me to do one-to-ones is now a fully purpose-built centre. We have 2 float cabins, which are 7 feet in height and 6 feet by 8 feet. They have double doors on the front of them, so it creates a space that you open up and step into, rather as open up and close on yourself. We have an upstairs open plan, group work area, and we have a one-to-one room. So it's to take away as many barriers as we possibly could for people. We have colour therapy added to the cabins. So children who are on the spectrum, if you take a child who's on the spectrum, who's living with heightened anxiety as it is, and put them in a sensory deprived environment, it'll send their anxiety into overdrive. So we've had colour therapy added, we've had speakers added under the water so people can listen to music or whatever they like. We have had a disco ball added that you can put in the room, so it means that there's a light darting around the place to keep people's attention. But we also, with the speakers, because flotation increases creativity, because it creates whole brain function, which means it allows the left and the right brain to synchronise and to work together. So you can think in a very linear fashion from a very creative viewpoint. And because it puts the mind into theta state, it's your natural learning and consolidation state. So the Navy SEALs would use flotation. So where it would take about 6 months to learn a new language, the Navy SEALs can do it in 6 weeks using flotation therapy.
Wow.
So we have people that come in. We had a guy that came in and he was training to be a surgeon and was listening to his recordings from his trainings in the float tank, because you take it in at a deeper level.
Incredible. Wow. So many benefits.
So many benefits
Amazing.
to it.
And how long would you go into the tank for?
Sessions are generally an hour. Once you've done it for a while, it's 90 minutes, because 90 minutes allows for that full cycle of the left and right brain. Because when that happens, your brainwave activity is called your ultradian rhythm. And your ultradian rhythm, once you can reset your ultradian rhythm, it'll reset your circadian rhythm, so your sleep pattern. So a lot of people would use this for insomnia. As I said earlier, because 80% of our energy is spent fighting the effects of gravity, a lot of people would use us for pain management. A lot of people would use us we have one of the Belfast Giants floats with us. We've had Ulster Rugby, and we have an MMA gold belt title holder for Northern Ireland. He floats with us. We have a boxer who comes and floats with us. So we have lots of different people from lots of different backgrounds, because
for different reasons.
Exactly. I mean, who couldn't do with an hour away from the world?
Right.
An hour away from your mobile phone.
Away, yeah, stop. I'm with you there, but amazing. Incredible. So as we were talking about it, I've had the pleasure of trying this out once, but I was floating in large bath, but those stars on the roof. But it was amazing, absolutely amazing. And I think from memory there might have been classical music or something playing, but all I remember is the stars. It was very, very dark, and the stars in the ceiling, but it was incredible. But you're saying it should really be in the dark.
It's for maximum impact. I mean, if you have no issues with the dark and you have no issues with silence, then it definitely is. What happens is when we're born with over 300 bones. When our bones, most of that is cartilage. When our bones fuse and form, we're left with just over 200. At that point, so if you think of it, like when you're first born, when you hit about 3-4 months, you start to learn balance. So you start to kind of, you're like, oh, and your unconscious mind's going left a bit, right a bit, left. And then once it locks in balance, it's like, right, let's go on and learn something else. So you learn balance. Your bones then start to fuse and form. You learn you can pick yourself up and pull yourself up on chairs and things like that. What then happens is your whole skeletal structure becomes like a scaffold, like a cage for everything else to be attached to it. So, and that skeletal structure never gets a chance to rest and realign, because you're constantly either on your feet, on your bum, or on your back. You're making contact with the world 24/7. When you go into a float tank, because you're supported by like a solid liquid, what happens is that your skeletal structure gets a chance to rest and realign inside your body without having any weight on it at all. So your any injuries or any muscle ache or fatigue or arthritis or fibromyalgia or anything like that, because there's no pressure on it, then your body rests and repairs 4 times faster in a float environment than it does anywhere else. And what we're finding through fMRIs and EEG scans, again done at LIBOR, is that it starts to decrease activity within the limbic system. More importantly, the fight or flight, so the amygdala. And what that then does is it decreases activity within that part and starts to increase activity within the creative processing. So it means that you have restricted access to your fight or flight. So when you're in flotation, if there's something that you're stressed about, maybe something that's going on at work, or maybe something that's happened previously, you don't have the same access to that as you would have in your normal working day. But what you also have access to is the ability to go, hang on, why am I stressing about that? Or why don't I go and do da da da? So it just starts to give you options and opportunities within your own mind, because the one thing we all like to have is choice. None of us like to think that our back's against the wall and we have to do something. And unfortunately, modern life leaves us feeling like that and thinking like that in a lot of ways.
Very much so. I think I love bats, and actually, as you're describing there, I can think so a bat is like a 1% of what you're explaining, but I actually have some of the best brainwaves and ideas in the bat, some of the craziest ones too. So I think I'd be a good candidate for this. But you talk about the speed of change and the pressure, and we're talking about the digital age and the amount of information we're bombarded with every day as business owners. Just to get away for an hour and a half and reset would be incredible, and it's very important. You mentioned NLP and Paul McKenna as well.
Yes.
So how was that? You're able to judge me now if I'm talking.
Well, no. I am a firm believer in, I mean, the thing is, perception is projection. So if you perceive something to be true, you can project it out here. So if you're constantly telling yourself you're no good, you're stupid, you could never do this, you could never do that, then inevitably what's going to happen is you're going to bring that into your life. Because we are met by all that information I was talking about, anywhere between 2 million and billions of pieces of information. Our brain can actually only process around 134 bits of that information, which we then condense into between 5 to 7 chunks. So for example, if I was to ask you to name car brands, you'd be able to go through up to about 5, and then you'd go, and then there would be, and you'd have to actually think about it. So when in order to get to that information, we delete information that's not important to us. We distort information to fit our view of the world, and we generalise information. So we delete things that would maybe dismiss. So someone might say, oh, here, that jacket's really nice, but you might not have very much self-confidence or self-esteem. You're like, oh, this old thing, because you won't buy into what they say because you're deleting it. We distort things. So someone might say, do you know, like they might tell you you're not stupid, or they'll tell you that you have done a good job or whatever it is, but you'll find something in what they've said to confirm your belief that you are stupid or that you don't do a good job, and you'll generalise. So we all say, oh, do you know, nobody listens to me. And so many times I say to people, right, who's nobody? Nobody. Well, tell me who is nobody. Well, my husband. And who else? Well, my daughter. And who else? Well, my husband and my daughter. Like, well, that's not nobody. It's two people.
Yeah.
So I became really interested in neurolinguistic programming because I was very interested in how I had been programmed myself as a child by the environment that I was nurtured within. And one of the things I'd always wanted to do was to train with Richard Bandler, who was the one of the co-creators of neurolinguistic programming. And so I put the intention out there, and I was like, right, I really want to train with this guy, and I want to do it within the next 3 years. And I was very specific about what I was asking for. Within about 8 months, I found myself in London, training with Richard Bandler, and the guy he trains with is Paul McKenna. So, and then again, I was like, right, I really want to get a conversation with Paul McKenna. Like, now that I'm here, I really want to. So I left my hotel room and I was walking along the corridor, and who was coming the other way but Paul McKenna? So I says to him, I'm actually in this hotel for the training with you and Richard. And he said, oh yeah. So I got chatting to him, and I said, wouldn't it be fantastic if we could find some way to switch off the amygdala, to remove the triggers from previous experiences that harvest the emotional content? And he said, you need to do havening training. You need to speak to, so there's these two doctors, Ron and Steve Rudin. So from that conversation, I was like, I'm going to meet these guys. So again, put it into the universe, ended up going down to Dublin, doing some training with a guy in Dublin. Finished my training, started training in September, qualified in the March. And in the June that year, I found myself over in Coventry with the two doctors, receiving my certificate, receiving my qualification. So since then, I've done, I've been in contact with them as well. So that was the havening technique. So yeah, I'm just throwing things out there.
Amazing, excellent. No, it's incredible, and actually, the older and older I get, and the more I study and learn and talk to people like yourself, the more I realise how important our mindset is, and
Totally.
Everything we do around us, how we can influence our environment and influence our team and our business and our productivity, everything, our family life. It's incredible, and things like this should be taught in school as opposed to.
I'm working in a school actually just at the beginning of December.
Amazing.
And I'm looking to do a havening project within the school, working with young people to empower them. And the training that I'm doing in the school is actually mental health first aid.
Amazing.
Because young people should, I think it's something that's been so undervalued. We teach children how to read, write, we don't teach children how to understand when things aren't working in the way that we would like them to, and how we deal with that as well. Yeah. And I think, there was a huge push there in the sort of like 80s, 90s, early sort of 2000s, where, we told our children, you can be what you want to be, you can do whatever you want to do, you can do this, you can do. And children had this, this thing that there was no barriers there, they could do, And I recently was up in one of the prisons in Northern Ireland, and I was doing, because I'm also the regional coordinator for an approach called Smart Recovery, which is an alternative to AA. And I was chatting with the guys up there, and we were talking about trauma and addiction and about experiences in childhood. And one of the guys there said, well, do you know what? Here's something that'll really dispel your theory. He says, I grew up in a fantastic household. I grew up, there was never really any arguments or anything like that. I grew up, there was plenty of money around. I've had some really privileged experiences. I have had this, and this. I've had this provided for me, and I've still ended up here. So what's your theory on that? And I says, well, do you know what? See if you're a child who doesn't understand the word no. You become an adolescent who doesn't understand the word no. You then become an adult who doesn't understand the word no. And unfortunately in our society, you're going to get a lot of no's. And if you think that you're entitled to things, and you think, then you end up in an establishment like this, just the same as other people who can't understand the rules. So I think there's a lot to, I think there's a huge piece of work to do around getting children to understand how they operate and how they can, and again, as I was saying earlier, perception is projection. Yeah. And if you can see something in someone else, it's because you have it within you. And I think in a workplace especially, that is vitally important. If you see something that's working in a way that, something that kind of conflicts with you, rather than fighting against it, stopping and asking yourself, hang on a minute, what does this actually say about me? And what is it I see in this person that's triggering something in me that's enabling me to feel like this?
Very good, amazing. So I'm going down my own journey in this as well. So no, without a doubt, incredible. And this all takes you then to set up your own business.
Yes.
And now we're combining health and wellness with business, which is very, very interesting, and I'm sure for people who are watching this as well. how important is health and wellness in a business environment?
Massively. And I think, for years and years, wellness was it was like this warm and fuzzy kind of thing that some big companies done, and where I think now, a lot of the business world are realising that it's an integral part of any strategy, because when you can improve the health through wellness within your within your employees, within your staff teams, within your organisation, then you're increasing productivity, you're reducing sick leave, you're having a much more productive environment for people to come into. Because, not forgetting that you spend a lot of time at work. People spend between 30 and 50 hours a week at work. If you're doing something that you like within an environment that you don't like, that can really change the way you feel about that job.
Yeah.
If you're doing something that you don't particularly like within an environment that you love, it just makes things it just makes your working day a lot easier. Ultimately, it's like find a job you love and you'll never work again in your life. That's it.
And that's the old adage that we need to follow. We're talking about obviously health and wellness. So what is the difference? Because I'm talking of as if they're the same. So what is the difference between health and wellness?
Health, for me, health is a goal. Wellness is the path to achieve that goal. Okay. So health is there's the biopsychosocial model that we all have. So we as people, we are perceived as biological, biological, psychological, and social. I firmly believe spirituality should be in with that as well. And I recently had a chat with a lovely gentleman, Jerry Skeleton. And Jerry Skeleton is a lecturer at Queen's, I think, and he also works in Belfast Met and is in the social work delivery within the Belfast Met. And Jerry has been talking about spirituality within social work for millions of years. And people think of spirituality as either religion or as clairvoyance or as ghosts or as angels or and that's not, spirituality is very much, it's the spirit of the person. And if you think that the last thing we do before we expire is let go of our breath, then ultimately the first thing we do when we inspire is take our first breath. And the spirit is the thread that goes from that first breath to that last breath. And I think that the wellness is I think wellness is key to that the part of the spirit is taking time to focus on your breath. Because I think we all tend to breathe from here these days because we're all so stressed, and we're supposed to breathe deeply from our stomach. Keep us in the moment. Do you know what I mean?
So we're talking about how and how important it is, but the benefits into a business, if a company then decides, okay, we need to look at the wellness of our team, or the health of our team, and the environment, is there major benefits or impacts that will have?
It will increase productivity within the team, but I think also, people look at wellness and they think, well, if we put some water in the in the office environment, if we tell people they should be eating healthy, if we tell people this, we tell people, there's a difference between telling people and actually showing people. So for example, even saying, recognising, 80% of our workforce goes out at lunchtime. So let's get the menus of 10 of the local places that they would possibly go and look at the healthiest things and send an email around saying, did you know that this place do this? Did you know that this only has that many or this is high in these essential fats, or this is higher, or whatever it is. It's taken a different look on wellness. And it's all very well saying, you should be having, exercising for half an hour, a minimum of 3 times a week. Well, it's then about saying, and we have secured this 10% discount or whatever percent discount, or we will bring in, on the last Friday of every month, laughter yoga or something like that. So it's walking the walk as well as talking the talk. And as you say, it's not just having it as a tick box exercise.
I'm with you there. So if we were to look at 2 different types of business owners, I'm thinking of the self-employed, the people who are working for themselves, who are doing everything themselves, and sometimes it can be stressful, a bit of pressure and all the things that go around that. And then we have the company owners, small company owners, medium-sized company owners who have a team of people and they're trying to look after them as well. What strategies or is there any advice you could give to both sets of people that they could maybe consider, one for themselves, the business owners, and then I'm thinking of the people in the team who don't have anything like this at all, but know and want to look after their team?
I think, as I was saying, going back to the mental health first aid training, I think that's a great place to start for a workplace, because what that does is it raises the awareness within that workplace on the signs and symptoms to look out for. As well as I say, providing various different, talk to your staff team, talk to your team. What would they like to do? What kind of things are they? Because while someone might go, oh yes, yoga would be great, we could do yoga on a Friday afternoon, there's somebody else like, I am not doing yoga. So it might be, well, instead of, we're saying get out at lunchtime and go and do whatever, here's some of the local, walks that would be really interesting to go around that would take 10 minutes. So while we're doing this, so there's, as I say, I think it's if you have a strategy that's like, I think this would be a good idea, and I think that would be a good idea. Your good ideas are not everybody else's good ideas. Talk to your staff team. Do a wee bit of a strategy. Have a look at what kind of things. Have a half-day development day, looking at what kind of things, because then people kind of go, what you're actually interested in what I think, and you're interested in how I see this. Then what then happens is they have ownership of whatever it is that comes in, which empowers them to say, I feel like I actually belong here, which feeds into their wellness, which feeds into their, which ultimately feeds into their health, which is reducing sick leave, which is, so while these are all the key, these are all the key indicators, I suppose, that you want to hit here, it's the simple things by doing that. But in terms of business leaders, just be aware of your true authentic self. Be aware of who you are as a person. Like you're going to be there well after the business is. So it's making sure that focus on your breath 2 or 3 times a day. Focus on your breath and check in with yourself. Like, how am I doing? How am I just now? I'm stressed to the max. I've got 5 emails that I've still not sent. I still need to go down and speak to Dave about doing whatever. I still need to, focus on my breath. And it's just, I think just taking that time. Float. Everybody should float. That's like my key top thing. Everybody should come and float. And I think everybody should buy a package and have their workers to come and float. And they're just, because I think everybody, and I also believe that, the work that I deliver obviously comes at a cost, as I'm a businesswoman. But at the same time, finance shouldn't be a barrier for anybody, and I think there's ways and means around. So I do quite a bit of charity stuff. Again, because my until I opened Hydroease, I very much was involved in the charity and voluntary sector. Worked with young people who'd been through the care system. Worked with people who'd experienced homelessness. Worked with people who were experiencing addiction. Worked with people. So there's lots of different ways that people just wouldn't be able to afford that. But there is ways and means through things. There's funding opportunities. There is, it doesn't have to be something that's really expensive. Although I'm saying float, but for looking at a staff team, there'd be something that you could do that wouldn't cost a lot of money.
Of course, no, I appreciate that. And just general health and well-being tips, and obviously you've studied a lot, you've actually invested a lot in training and educating yourself. So anyone watching or listening to this, what health and safety or health and well-being tips would you?
Now that's a different topic.
Yeah, that's tomorrow.
A couple of top tips I would give is, in us all we have a vagus nerve system, and it activates our parasympathetic nerve, which deactivates our sympathetic nerve. Basically what that means is it reduces our stress and anxiety in that moment. So if you can get a cup of cold water and put some cold water, so you can do this in the office, a cup of cold water, put cold water under your tongue. Now the quickest way to get anything into your system is under your tongue. Put the cold water under your tongue, allow your tongue just to float, focus on how that feels, count backwards from 5 to 1, and it'll bring your anxiety, it'll bring any kind of stress down immediately. Or bring the focus of your attention to your breath. Just take 3 simple breaths in and then back out. Another really good one is think 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So think of 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can feel, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. And again, what that does is bring you right into that moment in time. So rather as you're going, oh my God, did I send that email that they spoke to me about the other day there? Oh, in future I'm going to be in so much trouble if I do it. So instead of going thinking back that way and thinking forward that way, it's just bringing you straight into that moment in time. And talk. I mean, as you can probably see, I could talk for Scotland, Northern Ireland, like everywhere. Tell people how you're feeling. You know, find someone to confide in.
Amazing. Thank you very much. I will be trying that this evening. That'll be it. And you have clearly, as we mentioned, invested a lot in training and developing yourself so you can upskill and pass your knowledge on. Is that something that you think everyone should do?
Yes. I think it's the one thing that we tend to overlook when it comes to investment. We'll buy, you know, the nicest car, we'll invest in a nice holiday, we'll invest in a nice house, we'll invest in nice clothes, but when it comes to investing in ourselves, very rarely do we take the time, I don't have the time to invest in myself, I don't have the time for this. Or they just don't see the value money-wise. So every year I try and do a couple of different things just to keep me ahead. Like this year I have, what have I done this year? I went to London and trained with Andy Harrington, who's the world's leading public speaker. And so I done 12 days with Andy Harrington perfecting public speaking and looking at productising what I do and various things like that. I have also was over in London earlier on in the year with the Institute of Directors. So I was at one of their events, Ciaran Brady was talking and stuff. So again, she was one of these people that I was like, I'd like to see her face to face. So I went along to that. On the 24th of this month, I'm doing some training with a gentleman, Gavin Murphy, who I'd done my clinical hypnotherapy training with. And he's doing this around dream interpretation, because I believe the unconscious mind holds the keys to everything that's happening in this moment in time. So and dreaming, it comes to us in our dreams, whether it's, you know, whatever it is, everything has meaning. So that'll be my other training this year. But yeah, definitely invest in yourself. It's the wisest investment you will ever make and gives you the best return for money.
Incredible. And what do you think the future, like obviously we all hear about health and well-being and even our fitness if we go there, in the press, and what we eat and all this good stuff that we should be doing, but it's hard to do. Enough said. What do you think the future would hold or does hold for us? Do you think we'd be smarter? Will the knowledge get spread out and our children be educated instead of maybe learning about the sun, the moon, the stars, and learn life skills, or both?
That's it. And I think it's really, what I think is really cool is that we're starting to really take a step backwards, which is brilliant. We're taking a step back to where things were a lot more simple. I was recently at an event. There's a girl who lives in Northern Ireland, Deborah Reynolds, and she's wrote a book and it's called The Gut Revolution, or is it Good Mood Food? One of them anyway, but it's about gut health. And you know, gut health was something that was, you know, we knew about years ago. You know, so fermented foods and things like that. And I think there's a big push towards, you know, organic foods, and there's a big push towards people being, you know, having mental strength. There's a huge buzz around the word resilience now. There's a huge buzz around the word internal landscapes, and you know, and things like that. So hopefully the future holds that people will become more educated, but educated in a really kind of subtle way that people just know, people just have a knowing. Because I know the training that I've done, a lot of it I've kind of sat back and went, that makes perfect sense. Like, why did I not think like that anyway? And I think because we're constantly creating versions of ourselves to be more, see more, do more. At the end of the day, we're human beings. The clue's in the title, but we've become human doings. So hopefully the future is we get back to just being.
And life is more simple, we hope.
That's it.
And then we talked about resilience and everything. When I think here of resilience, I think of children and obviously business as well. You obviously do work with schools, so do you think we have a lot to do to improve our education system still, and what the kids are being taught, and even as you say ourselves as parents, like do we know?
That's it.
How we educate our children, like it's.
And even, you know, it's interesting you saying that, because I have a 28-year-old son. I have a daughter who's 21 at Christmas, and then I have a wee boy who's 6. And my son, like, you know, I had him very young. I was a very different version of me back then. And I remember when Gary was only about maybe 5 or 6, and he was putting his jacket on, and I was rushing out to get to school in the morning. I couldn't find my car keys. I was, it was just like,
Everyone's morning,
that's
yeah.
it. So, and he was like, he couldn't get his jacket on, and he was like trying, and I was like, come on, hurry up, get out in it. And I was getting really flustered and frustrated with him, and he was like, I can't get my jacket on. I was like, come here and let me do it, I'll help. The word help. So I then, fastened his jacket up, hurried him out the door, got him into school, rushed him off and went away. So what inevitably has happened is, over the years, my son has developed this belief, and you can see it in his actions. He doesn't, and he's never said this, but I can see it in his actions. Gary's perception of help is someone coming in, taken over completely, rendering you powerless. So Gary could be hanging from a cliff with an itchy backside, and he would not ask you for help, because it would mean you coming in and taking control. So when I sort of realised this through all the trainings and stuff that I've done, because when you do this type of training, you realise, oh my God,
yeah.
I've messed up so much as a parent. I'm
Yeah.
so bad.
Yeah.
My poor children. So recently, the same sort of situation with my wee boy. But I was able to be right in that moment, and I was like, oh my goodness, I have a chance here to change this for Sonny. So, and he said, I can't get my jacket on. And I said, would you like some help? And he was like, but it's stuck and it won't do it. And I said, would you like some help? So I waited until he actually acknowledged that I'd asked that question. And he says, yes, Mummy. And I said, what would you like me to do? And he said, I can't do this bottom bit. So I got the zip in and pulled it up a wee bit. And then I said, right, you do it. So I held the bottom. He zipped it up. So hopefully, as he grows up, he'll understand the word help means someone coming in to assist until you can take over and control whatever it is that's going on. But again, it would be great if we had all the learnings that we have now to go back and.
It's incredible, and parenting now, again, as you say, our eyes have been opened,
yeah.
and parenting now, it's incredible what you say and you do and how you deal with your kids. Very conscious, as you mentioned there, and
it'd be great if it just came with a manual.
Where's the book?
Do you know, that's it.
Doesn't
Here's your
exist.
child.
Yeah,
Here's your manual.
Someday, maybe 100 or 200 years, we figure it out.
But even at that, people who have been nurtured in a certain way, or people who are predisposed through, there's a lot of research in Northern Ireland now around transgenerational genetics, and looking at how we can have certain things passed on. Like for me, for example, my mum was alcohol dependent and lived with trauma. Her mum was alcohol dependent after trauma. My granddad was schizophrenic. So you can plot that all the way back. Yeah. So I almost had this self-fulfilling prophecy. Well, of course I'm going to be a drinker or doing whatever because my mum was, and there becomes a point where you're the generation that bucks that trend and stops it, and you change it. You change it for the future.
For your kids, incredible. I can see it. I do understand it, and I'm living it as well. Trying to, but what to do? We're all learning every day.
That's it.
Amazing. Well, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you for inviting me.
And that was brilliant. Learning so much as ever. And flotation, here we come. So if anyone watching this or anyone's interested in finding out more about your flotation services or talking to you or reaching out to you, what's the best way for them to do that?
The best way, our website is www.hydro-ease.co.uk. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, Vivian McKinnon on LinkedIn. Or there's also Wellness Consultant NI, which is www.wellnessconsultantni.co.uk.
Excellent, thank you very much again. And we've been broadcasting here live from Innovation Factory on Springfield Road, and your host has been Ciaran from ProfileTree, the content marketing agency. Thank you, and see you in the next video.